Hey everyone, so today we're going to be talking all about light. Let's get to it. All right, so light is essential to photography, right? So I don't know if you know this, but the word photography literally means drawing with light. This was really set into people's minds in early photography when we were using film because it was a chemical interaction of the light hitting the film. But cameras still work the same whether we're talking about film or digital. Just the process of capturing it is a little bit different. Instead of capturing the light on actual piece of film, with digital, we're capturing it through a digital sensor and writing a file. So understanding how to work with light is going to be huge to help you communicate with your photos. Do you want your photo to be happy? Do you want it to be dramatic? What are you trying to say about the subject? Knowing how to use light will help you really communicate about your subject and your aesthetic. So today we're going to talk about the 3 essential things about light: quality, direction, and amount. Okay, so first off, we have quality. Now, what do I mean about quality? I mean, is the light going to be direct, which is usually seen as a more harsh looking light, or is it going to be diffuse, which is more of a soft light? So for example, let's just look at this image really fast. This light is, I would call that pretty diffuse. It looks like it's nice and soft. Now it looks like the light back there might have been, the sun. It looks really bright, like it's shining through. But I have a feeling that maybe there might be some fog or something that the light is passing through to make it more of a diffuse light. We're going to look at some more examples. Okay, so direct natural light. Here we go. Come on. Direct natural light is unfiltered, unblocked sunlight. So if you're outside, it's a bright sunny day, the sun is hitting you, that is direct natural light. It is harsh. It produces very strong shadows and strong contrast. Now this is really helpful when you're trying to backlight a subject. So if you've ever seen those photos of like silhouettes where someone is standing somewhere pretty but you just see the black outline of them, that's because they're being lit by backlight, and there's not any light hitting them from the front. And it's also really nice for emphasizing texture. So for those of you who maybe would be looking into going into commercial photography where you're photographing objects for a business, if that object has a texture that's important to selling it, then you would want to use some nice side direct light to really emphasize those textures. Now on the flip side, if you're a portrait photographer and maybe you're photographing someone who's a little bit older, who has some wrinkles, that side light is actually going to emphasize the texture of their wrinkles, so you would not want to use it in that case unless you were trying to communicate the texture of their skin. If you were trying to show that they have these wrinkles, time, weathered skin, something like that, then you would want to use it. So you're going to find a lot as we go through this class. There's all these rules, and the rules really have to do with what you're trying to communicate. So the rule is, if you want to use side light to create texture, that's fine in some situations, but it's not as helpful in other situations. So that's why learning all this stuff will help you communicate better. All right, so diffused natural light is light that's passing through something. So it starts off as direct, but then it passes through something else that softens the light and it gives you that nice diffuse look. So in nature, that might be clouds, mist, fog. Even standing in the shade is going to be diffuse light because you don't have the sun directly hitting you. The sun is hitting the areas around you, then bouncing back from the environment onto you. So that would be diffuse light. Now, if we're talking about artificial light, You know, if you were photographing someone just with a flash, just straight flash, that's going to be direct light. Now, if you put something over that flash to diffuse it, then you're talking about diffused light. If you've ever been in, you know, like a portrait studio where you see those white umbrellas, those umbrellas are diffusers. They put them on the direct lights to diffuse the light coming through and make it softer. And this is the type of light that is usually preferred for a whole lot of portrait subjects, especially when you're talking about soft subjects like babies, maternity, family. We don't want a really, you know, moody type of direct light look for that. We want something really nice and soft, okay? So where you would want direct light, let's say you're photographing a musician who has something kind of, you know, groundbreaking, or, you know, maybe kind of goes with their music, for it to be more direct light, more harsh, more dramatic. Now, on the other side, if it was a musician who did really, you know, like jazzy, slow type of music, that direct light maybe wouldn't make sense. Maybe you would want a softer light. Okay? All right. So, we're going to look at a couple photos, and we're going to look at the shadows that we're seeing, and we're going to see that the direct light usually has, the shadows usually have a really delineated edge. You can see that edge pretty clearly. Whereas the diffused light, the edge of, you know, where the shadow and the light meet isn't a really hard edge. It's more of a gradient. It's moving from dark to light. So let's look at these examples. All right, so here we are at a lake, and you can see in these, in the flowers, let's see if I click on it, it might go larger screen. So if you see in the flowers, you can see that there's this really, you know, this really delineated line between the shadow and the light areas. You can see them all up in these flowers, okay? And that tells me right away that this was direct light. Besides that, we can see that it's a pretty clear day. There are some clouds in the background, but they're not covering the light that's hitting this. We have direct sunlight hitting these flowers. Okay, and so here's another example where we actually have, you know, we do have some nice light coming through here, but you can see back here there's a lot of misty fog stuff happening. So that is creating diffusion of the light coming through that shadow or mist and then lighting up our scene. And you can see here, instead of like a really strong line between the shadow and the light areas of this tree, it is more of, like I said, a gradient. It's light here, it's dark here. Now, you know, you can't say exactly where it switches from shadow and light because it's just a smooth transition. So this is diffuse light. Okay, so now something to note is that, oh yes, that the colors usually with diffuse light aren't going to be as bright and vibrant. Now, I know this isn't the best example in the world because you're like, wow, those greens look really bright and vibrant. Well, that's because I use a little editing magic for that one. But I'm going to show you an example in just a minute where you can see this more effectively. Before we get to that though, let's look at a couple portraits. So again, direct light gives more of a dramatic look, while diffuse light is a softer look. So if you're out and about trying to do a portrait and you want that softer look, you want to go out on a day that's a bit overcast or misty or foggy, or look for a shady area to photograph in. And so let's look at these. So we have a couple of portraits here. One is with direct light and one is with diffuse light. Now, before I talk about it, take a moment and look at these. Which do you think is which? Okay, you have your answers in your head? So this one here is going to be your direct light. Why is it direct light? Let's take a look a little bit closer. So you can see that this line right here, the shadow, that is a pretty distinct shadow line. That comes from that direct light. It's hitting her hair. Her hair is creating the shadow. And this one, you know, it's a little difficult because there's actually a mixture of light in this scene. From back here, we had a door open that was letting in diffused light, and that is what is lighting up the back of her hair here and the back of her arm there. Along with that, you know, we're looking at this arm, and you can see that there is a fade, right, from light and shadow, and that's more because of the cylindrical shape of her arm versus the actual light. But if you look at these shadows here, you can see this is a very, very distinct shadow. Now on this next portrait, there's still light and shadow happening here, right? If there wasn't light and shadow, it would look two-dimensional, as in like a cartoon or something. So if we look like at her forehead here, you can see it's brightest here, and then we have it going a little bit darker on the edges, and the darkest side being right here. So this was shot on an overcast day. The light was coming in from over here, but there was a bunch of clouds, so we had this really nice soft light coming in. You can also see, like, under her nose, it is a little bit darker under there, so the light was coming in from up here, but all right here is nice and bright. All right, let's see. Moving on. Okay, so here we go. Here is the exact same building shot 2 different days. One day it was bright and sunny outside, one day it was really cloudy, overcast type of day. And you're going to notice how much difference the colors specifically look in these examples. All right, so here's the first one. We have so if we look at this shadow back here, it is a very, you know, clean line there, very direct light. The sunlight is hitting the building and then causing the shadow to be created here and here. Now let's go look at the next one. Okay, same building, different day. You can see that there's still shadow over here, so we're still getting from the same direction. The sun was still in the same direction, but because of that diffusion, it's a much softer move from shadow to light. So here you can see that there is darkness here, but then there's a soft transition into the lit areas. Yeah, pretty dramatic, right? Now, going back to what we were saying about communication, so with this photo, this, for me at least, it communicates more about the bright colors. We have this really beautiful orangey brick happening, and then we're having this contrasting really beautiful blue sky. Whereas this one, the color isn't nearly as important. The brick actually looks more like that brick red color, but you know, because of the mood of this, it does feel a lot more gloomy. Okay, so moving on, we're going to look at these 2 photos, and these 2 photos were taken at the same day, same location, but by having my subject turn away from the light, I was able to, and have the light bounce around from the atmosphere, it created a diffuse light. So let's look at the differences here. Okay, so this first photo is taken in the sun. We have that really bright sun coming from the side, hitting his face. Super cute, right? Now you can see that there's, you know, the shadow there has that very distinct line. Now let's look at this next one. All right, and so now we have a very soft light happening, and the first photo was actually taken with him sitting right over here on this rock. So what changed? He is now turned away from the sun. Like I said, now you could see his shadow is coming right here from the front, kind of a reflection shadow, whatever. The sun is now hitting the back part of him, and because the sun is hitting the back, it's also hitting in front of him. It's hitting the water and the rocks that were in front of him, and then bouncing back and creating that really soft light. So if you're just you absolutely cannot figure something out, you can try doing something like this. Now, personally, my issue with this portrait is that, you know, because of the positioning and everything, we have these really bright areas back here. And you'll find out that having these really bright areas does draw your eye away from the main subject. Now, in this case, I was working with a client. They specifically wanted the photos here. So I was just working with what I had. It happens sometimes. All right. So next we're going to talk about the direction of light. And the direction of light is another communication tool. It's really going to change up how a person looks. And this is what your next project is going to be about. So pay attention. So we have direction is the light hitting your subject from the front, from the side, from the back, from above, from below. All of these things will change the perception of your subject and the communication. So this was an exercise that I did with a small figure. You could totally play around and do this as well. And this is showing the different directions of light. So this first photo was with a light straight on, and I actually have more photos that show you the placement of the light, so just hold on for a sec. Let's just look. All right, this one is a little bit higher, and you can see if you especially look at the cheekbones, they're more lit up in this. But if you really want to make those cheekbones be more dramatic, you want to go a little bit higher. This is moving the light over a bit, moving it a bit more, moving it all the way to the side, so side lights, only half of the face is lit up. Okay, this one is actually hitting from below. And then this is backlight. Now, something that we're going to talk about even more later in the semester, once you get a little bit of handle on light, is how a lot of portrait photographers combine different lights, such as the backlight, side light, and front lights in order to create a balanced portrait. Something to look forward to later in the semester. Okay, so let's keep moving on down. So some general rules is front light is going to flatten or de-emphasize texture, just like we were talking about with side light emphasizes, front light de-emphasizes, because if the shadows are hitting me, my shadow is behind me. I mean, right now in this video you can't see my shadow, so it's going to flatten things out. Shadows is what makes things feel more dimensional. So this is a great rule for portraiture when you're working with older subjects. It's going to make those wrinkles less obvious. Trust me, they'll love you for doing this. So using that front light. That front light for portraits in particular is also very popular with fashion type of photography, where you want to emphasize the cheekbones and the face, makeup type of stuff. You usually have a nice front light angled down a little bit, and it'll create that nice shot. Again, side lighting emphasizes texture and creates long shadows. Backlighting creates that silhouette and or glow around your subject. So if you're photographing someone and they have a light hitting them from the back, that's when you get that nice little glow going around them. And just a good rule of thumb to know is that lighting from below actually creates a sinister or scary feeling. We call it monster lighting. And if you think about it, when do we ever see anybody lit from below? The sun doesn't, once it goes down, it's not gonna, we never see the sun hitting us from below. So naturally we don't see that very often. The times we do see it, if you think back, is around a fire, camping or something, going back to our ancestors and such. That's probably when they saw it. And if you think about that type of lighting, that's when you tell those ghost stories, scary stuff. That underlighting is just very unnatural feeling. So if you were creating a portrait and you wanted someone to look scary, that's what you would use. In fact, I would say, you know, look at those like horror movie posters, especially going back, you know, over the decades, and you'll notice that a lot of times that lighting is used. It's even been used in propaganda posters. I've noticed like in World War II posters where they were trying to demonize the Japanese. They used, even though it wasn't an actual photo, it was an illustration, they still used that lighting from below, that monster lighting, to make them look more scary. Something else about lighting for portraits is angled from above, like I talked about. Then we also have angled from 45 to 0 to 45 degrees for the light is usually used. So, and just to explain a little bit, when I'm saying that it's 0 and 45 degrees and stuff, so if I'm my subject and my light is right in front of me, that's what I would call 0 degrees. If I move this way a bit, it'd be 30 degrees. So you're kind of thinking about like, if you were looking at me from above, there'd be a circle around me, and then the line from me and my light is that degree. So there's 30 degrees, 45 degrees, 90 degrees would be side lighting. Okay. Hey, who knew you would be using math? You'd be surprised how much math is actually involved in the world. Okay, so going back to those original photos I was showing you, here's some setup shots so you can kind of see the direction of light that I was using. I did put my camera on a tripod because I didn't want to change up the framing because I wanted to give you guys really clear, you know, examples. But I did use a desk lamp instead of my fancy photo equipment just to show you that, you know, this doesn't have to do with having the most expensive lighting in the world. You can do this type of exercise with almost any light. You could even use another cell phone, like someone else's cell phone flashlight, to do stuff like this. Okay, so here is that first, was that the first one? Oh, yeah, it is. All right, here's the first one, and you can see that my light is pretty much right above my camera, you know, hitting him straight on. It's still actually a little bit angled. But yeah, so you get this really, you know, regular front light. And this is the type of light that you usually get from like your camera flash. So it kind of goes back and forth. For a long time, that really front camera flash was like a no-no in photography. Like you looked as like an amateur. Then in fine art, some photographers started using that to give that really bare, raw look to their photos, and so now it's kind of come back into fashion. The thing to know with any trend is it come and goes. So just know that there's that front flash look. It looks like an amateur type of lighting, but sometimes amateur lighting comes in style. Okay. So next, this is the from above. So you can see I've moved my light. Now it's coming down from above, and that emphasized the cheekbones. And it's generally a pretty flattering light. This is used a whole lot in beauty, makeup, fashion type of photos. My lighting here at home, I have pretty much set up like that, so I look a little better. But yeah. Oh. And this is a little, you know, preview for when you take the portraiture class. You guys will probably go over all this stuff, but it's also called a butterfly light, because when you have, and actually my light is so diffused you can't see it very well, but when you have that front light, you'll actually get a little shadow underneath your nose, and they call that a butterfly. Okay, so now this one is 30 degrees to the side, so you can see the position if you're looking above. So there's 0 degrees, and then there's about 30 degrees going, give or take. I didn't, you know, actually measure, but it's about that. And what I really do to know that it's a 30-degree light is looking at the shadows again. This is also called a loop light, and that's because if you look right here on the nose, there is that bit of shadow and it looks like a little loop. So that's how you know you've gotten loop lighting with a person, at least, is by moving it till you get that little loop of shadow right there. All right. Next, we have the 45-degree light. So if we're looking above, it's, 30 was like over here, move it over a little bit, that's the 45. And again, we really know this because looking at the shadows. So I basically moved the light until the shadow of the nose got long enough to connect with the shadow of the cheekbone. And that creates what's called a Rembrandt light. Rembrandt was a famous painter who used this dramatic lighting for his paintings all the time, so much so that when photographers started using it, they called it after him. So this is a Rembrandt light. Again, that nose shadow connects to the shadow from the cheekbone, and it creates like a little triangle of light on the cheek, and that's exactly what you want to look for when you're creating Rembrandt light when you're shooting portraits. Okay, now we have the side lighting, which is that 90-degree light. You can see it's right from the side here. Half of the face is lit up, half of it's in shadow, and you'll see this a lot for dramatic type of portraits, movie posters, some musicians. It's used a lot. And for good reason. It does look dramatic. It can give you this very much, light versus dark, evil versus bad, two different sides of the story type of look. A dichotomy, basically. Dichotomy meaning, you're showing two sides of the same thing. Okay, and here's that famous monster lighting. Now, on my subject, it wasn't the best example because those hands are, blocking some of that light. So I did add in the classic Frankenstein. This is kind of where the whole idea of monster lighting came from. It was from these really old horror flicks where they would light all the bad guys like this. So as you're watching movies or TV or whatever, start paying attention to the light and see if they're matching the light with the character. I don't know if you've ever heard of that show, The 100, but there's this one scene, I think it's in season 4, where there's a character and they're talking about all the bad things that this other character did, and they're just hammering into them, and that whole time the character they're talking about is lit just like that because they're pointing out the monster inside of them. So yeah, keep a lookout for that stuff. Okay, and once again, backlighting. I've got my light completely behind my subject, and we have created a nice little silhouette here. And you can see on the hips, at least, where there's that little bit of a glow happening. If you want to get more of a glow, you really have to just play with the angle of the light, but it's still coming from behind. Okay, so last but not least, we're almost done here, guys. I've got a mount. So the amount of light in the scene has a huge impact on your settings to get a good exposure. We're going to talk about more of this coming up, don't worry. Just trying to, ease you into all of this terminology. But so, for example, let's go back up really quick to this. So remember I talked about this was, in the same location, but just I had him turn. Well, I didn't keep my settings the same. Because he's turned away from the light now here, I had to let more light in my camera to get a good exposure. So these little subtle changes in light can have a huge difference in what the settings you use. Let's get back down here. Okay. So the strongest light really is going to be that direct sunlight. There's hardly any light out there that is stronger than that. Studio lights are basically trying to replicate the sun. Now, weather conditions, like I talked about, such as clouds, fog, and mist, and shade, can cut it significantly, and so can being in the shade. Indoor lights, I know it seems really bright when you go inside, but you know how your eyes adjust when you're going like from really bright outdoors to indoors. Your eyes adjust, and basically the pupils in your eyes open up to let more light in. And we're going to talk about how basically aperture, one of the exposure settings, is the exact same thing. You open your aperture to let more light in, you close it to let less light in. Our eyes do this automatically. Even if I look from a sunny area to a shady area, my eyes are doing it like super fast. So yeah, it's really interesting how that works. So our eyes naturally adjust to low light. So just keep that in mind. So for example, right now I'm indoors. I'm recording this video for you. I have 3 LED lights on that are shining onto me, along with my office overhead light that's adding more light to my background. So even though I'm indoors, to create good enough lighting for this video, I have to have 4 lights on. Okay, that's the difference. If I was outdoors, I wouldn't need any light. It would be nice and bright, no worries. Oh, and last, I already talked about this a little bit, but be aware of bright tones that may pull the viewer's eye away and overpower what you're trying to capture in a photo. Just something to try to keep an eye out when you're photographing. Try to avoid having a brighter background than your subject. So what I generally like to do is, if I'm going to shoot somebody in shade, I look for a background that's also in shade, so they are not darker than their background. If I'm shooting them in bright light, like in sunlight, then it doesn't really matter for the background. It could be bright light or it could be shaded, but you know, because if it's bright light and they're bright light, then it's matching. If it's shaded, even better, because it's going to naturally darken down and bring all the attention to my subject, which is the point of photography, right? We're trying to take photos of people or objects or places and make them the most important part of the subject. I'm sorry, the most important part of the photo. All right, guys. So that is my quick light lecture. The three important parts about light is going to be quality, direction, and amount.